Karoline Leavitt wasn't your typical millionaire. Sure, she had the big house, the fancy cars, and the kind of lifestyle most people only dreamed about. But there was something different about her. Something nobody could quite put their finger on. To the locals in Monterrey, Mexico, where her mansion sat perched high on a hill overlooking the city, Karoline was a mystery wrapped in secrets. She didn't throw loud parties or flaunt her wealth like others did. Instead, she kept to herself, rarely seen outside her heavily guarded estate. The mansion itself added fuel to the fire of speculation. With its towering iron gates, sprawling gardens, and sleek modern design, it looked more like a fortress than a home. People whispered that it had secret rooms, hidden tunnels, and maybe even traps for anyone foolish enough to trespass. Some said she'd made her money through shady deals. Others believed she worked with powerful people whose names you didn't dare speak aloud. Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain. Karoline Leavitt wasn't someone you messed with. But rumors have a way of spreading, especially in places like Monterrey, where the line between law and chaos often blurred. And when talk reached the ears of Los Cuervos, a ruthless cartel known for ruling the region with an iron fist, it caught their attention. They'd heard stories about Karoline's wealth and wondered if she might be hiding something valuable inside those walls. Maybe cash, weapons, or information they could use to tighten their grip on the area. Or perhaps she owed them protection money without even realizing it. Either way, curiosity turned into greed, and greed turned into action. 1. Night, under the cover of darkness, a group of men from Los Cuervos gathered near the edge of Karoline's property. Dressed in black tactical gear and armed to the teeth, they moved silently, avoiding the few streetlights scattered along the road. The plan was simple. Get in, find whatever valuables they could, and leave before anyone noticed. What they didn't know was that stepping onto Karoline's land would change everything, for them and for her. As they approached the outer wall surrounding the mansion, the leader of the group signaled for his men to stop. He scanned the area carefully, looking for signs of movement or security cameras. Nothing. Not even a guard dog barked in the distance. It felt almost too easy, but he shrugged it off. After all, how dangerous could some rich woman living alone really be? Confidence surged through him as he gave the signal to climb over the wall. Once inside, the men fanned out across the grounds, sticking to the shadows as they made their way toward the main house. Everything seemed eerily quiet, as though the mansion itself was holding its breath. There were no lights on inside, no sound of footsteps or voices. Just silence. As they crept closer, one of the men muttered, "This is going to be easier than we thought." But deep down, something felt wrong. None of them could explain why, but the longer they stayed, the heavier the air seemed to grow. Still, they pushed forward, determined to finish the job. Little did they know they weren't walking into just any home. They were stepping into a trap set by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The group of men moved cautiously across the perfectly manicured lawn, their boots sinking slightly into the soft grass. The mansion loomed ahead, its dark windows reflecting the faint glow of the moon. It was strange. Not a single light was on inside, not even in the grand foyer visible through the glass doors. For a place this size, it felt unnervingly empty. But the leader of the crew wasn't about to second-guess himself now. He signaled for his team to split up and cover more ground. One pair headed toward the side of the house, checking for any weak points in the security system. Another duo stayed close to the main entrance, ready to force their way in if needed. The rest followed the leader as he made his way to the back of the property, where large French doors opened onto a sprawling terrace. As they approached, one of the men noticed something odd, a faint hum coming from somewhere nearby. At first, he thought it might be an air conditioning unit or some kind of generator, but the sound grew louder the closer they got to the house. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, glancing nervously at the others. The leader waved him off. "It's nothing, focus." But the hum wasn't nothing. It seemed to pulse with a rhythm, almost like it was alive. The men exchanged uneasy glances but pressed on, unwilling to let fear get the better of them. After all, they'd done dozens of raids before. This was supposed to be just another job. Quick, clean, and profitable. What they didn't realize was that Karoline Leavitt had spent years preparing for moments like this. Her mansion wasn't just a home. It was a fortress designed to protect her from threats exactly like these. When they reached the French doors, the leader pulled out a small toolkit and went to work on the lock. Within seconds, the door clicked open and they slipped inside. The interior of the mansion was just as impressive as the outside, with high ceilings, marble floors, and expensive artwork lining the walls. But again, there was no sign of life. No alarm blared, no guards rushed in to stop them, and no cameras whirred overhead. Everything was still, as though the house itself was waiting. At first, the silence gave them confidence. They fanned out, searching for anything valuable. One man headed straight for a desk in the corner, rifling through drawers and scattering papers across the floor. Another checked behind paintings, tapping on the walls to see if any were hiding safes. The leader, meanwhile, stood in the middle of the room trying to figure out what to do next. Something about this whole situation felt off. Why would someone leave such a luxurious house completely unguarded? Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Everyone froze, their eyes darting toward the chandelier hanging above them. For a brief moment, the room plunged into darkness, only to be flooded with light again a second later. But this time, the light wasn't warm or inviting. It was harsh and clinical, like stadium floodlights. The sudden brightness blinded them momentarily, and when their vision cleared, they realized they weren't alone anymore. On the far wall, a massive screen had come to life, displaying live footage of every corner of the mansion. In the center of the screen sat Karoline herself, calm and composed, sipping tea from a delicate china cup. She looked directly into the camera, her piercing gaze locking onto each intruder, as though she could see right through them. Behind her, banks of monitors showed every move the men had made since stepping foot on her property. "Well, well," she said, her voice smooth but laced with ice. "You've entered restricted territory." The men stared at the screen in stunned silence. How had she known? More importantly, how had she been watching them this entire time? Before anyone could react, a loud clang echoed through the house, as steel shutters slammed down over every window and door, sealing them inside. Panic rippled through the group as they scrambled to find an exit, but it was useless. They were trapped. And then came the gas. A faint hissing sound filled the air, followed by a sharp chemical smell. One of the men shouted, "Gas! It's gas!" But it was already too late. Within seconds, their legs buckled beneath them and they collapsed onto the cold marble floor, unconscious. Back in her control room, Karoline watched it all unfold, with a detached expression. She took another sip of tea, then nodded to someone off camera. The cleanup crew would take care of the rest. For Karoline, this wasn't personal. It never was. She didn't relish violence or enjoy playing games with people's lives. But she understood one fundamental truth. Power protected itself. And tonight, Los Cuervos had learned that lesson the hard way. Hours later, the men woke up groggily, their heads pounding and their bodies aching. At first, they weren't sure where they were. The room was dimly lit, with concrete walls and a low ceiling that made it feel cramped and suffocating. Their hands were bound tightly behind their backs with thick metal cuffs, and their ankles were shackled too. As their vision cleared, they realized they were sitting in a circle, each of them chained to a heavy ring bolted into the floor. Panic set, and quickly. One of the men tugged at his restraints, cursing under his breath as he realized how secure they were. Another looked around frantically, trying to spot any weakness in the room. A loose chain, an unlocked door, anything that might give them a chance to escape. But there was nothing. The place was a fortress, just like the mansion had been. Only, this time they weren't guests. They were prisoners. The leader of the group was the last to fully regain consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he immediately scanned the room, his mind racing. He'd led countless operations for Los Cuervos, but nothing like this had ever happened before. This wasn't just a raid gone wrong. It felt personal, calculated. Whoever Karoline Leavitt was, She wasn't just some rich woman living alone in a fancy house. She was something else entirely, something far more dangerous. Before anyone could say a word, the sound of footsteps echoed through the space. Heavy boots clicked against the concrete floor, growing louder with each step. The men tensed, their breathing quickening as they braced themselves for what, or who, was coming next. Then the door swung open, and Karoline walked in. She didn't look like someone who had just taken down an entire team of armed intruders. Dressed in a tailored suit, her hair neatly styled and her posture relaxed, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing you hold all. The cards. In one hand, she held a folder stuffed with papers. In the other, she carried a small remote control, the kind used to operate electronic devices. Without saying a word, she walked over to a table in the center of the room and placed the folder down with a soft thud. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice calm but firm, "you've made a grave error." Her words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. No one responded. They were too stunned, too scared to speak. Karoline didn't wait for them to gather their thoughts. Instead, she flipped open the folder and pulled out a stack of documents, tossing them onto the table so the men could see. Each page contained detailed information, names, addresses, aliases, criminal activities, all linked to members of Los Cuervos. Some of the intel even implicated corrupt officials who had turned a blind eye to the cartel's operations. "You see," Karoline continued, leaning slightly forward, her piercing gaze locking onto the leader, "while you were busy plotting your little invasion, I was preparing my countermove. Every step you took tonight has been recorded, analyzed, and shared with certain interested parties." Her tone was icy, almost mocking, as though she found the whole situation amusing. The leader's face went pale. He glanced at the papers, then back at Karoline, his mind racing. Who was this woman? How did she have access to such sensitive information? And who were these interested parties she kept referring to? Whatever the answers were, one thing was clear. They were in deep trouble. Karoline let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. Then, without missing a beat, she pressed a button on the remote control. A screen mounted on the wall flickered to life, displaying footage of the raid, from the moment they scaled the outer wall to the second they collapsed unconscious in the mansion. There was no denying it now. Every move they'd made had been captured, documented, and stored away as evidence. "This isn't just about me," Karoline said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "This is about sending a message. You came into my home uninvited, thinking you could take whatever you wanted. Now, the world will know exactly who you are and what you've done." For the first time in years, the leader of Los Cuervos felt truly afraid. This wasn't just retaliation, it was destruction. Everything they'd worked for, their reputation, their power, their very existence, was crumbling right in front of them. And the worst part? There was nothing they could do to stop it. As Karoline turned to leave, she paused briefly at the doorway. Over her shoulder, she added, "Oh, and don't bother trying to find me. By the time you're free, I'll be long gone." With that, she stepped out of the room, leaving the men in stunned silence. Outside, the cleanup crew was already hard at work. Trucks loaded with equipment arrived to dismantle the makeshift prison, while others prepared to transport the captives to an undisclosed location. For Karoline, the night's events were far from over. She still had calls to make, plans to execute, and alliances to strengthen. But for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The cartel had underestimated her, and they would pay dearly for it. The next few days felt like a blur for Karoline Leavitt. On the surface, she returned to her usual routine, attending meetings, signing documents, and hosting small gatherings at her mansion. To anyone watching, it seemed as though nothing had changed. But beneath her calm exterior, she was working tirelessly to ensure that the fallout from the raid would ripple far beyond her property. She started by making phone calls. Each conversation was brief but deliberate, her voice steady and commanding. She spoke to people whose names carried weight, law enforcement officials, influential business figures, and even representatives from international organizations. Some of these individuals owed her favors, Others simply couldn't afford to ignore the evidence she now held in her hands. By the end of each call, they all agreed on one thing. Los Cuervos needed to be dealt with, and quickly. Karoline also reached out to old allies, people who had helped her build her empire over the years. These weren't ordinary connections. They were experts in their fields, capable of dismantling an operation as vast and dangerous as a cartel. Hackers erased digital footprints, lawyers drafted legal motions, and private investigators dug deeper into the lives of every member of Los Cuervos. Within hours, a web of information began to spread, linking the cartel to crimes that stretched across borders and continents. As the pieces fell into place, Karoline allowed herself a moment to reflect. Sitting alone in her study, she stared at the stack of files on her desk. Each document represented countless hours of planning, risk-taking, and sacrifice. This life, the constant vigilance, the hidden battles, was never what she'd envisioned for herself. But fate had other plans, and once you stepped onto this path, there was no turning back. Her thoughts drifted to the men locked away in that warehouse. She didn't feel pity for them. They had chosen their fate long before setting foot on her property. But she couldn't deny the toll it took on her. Every decision came with consequences, and while she believed in justice, she knew the line between right and wrong wasn't always clear. Still, she reminded herself why she did what she did. Power protected itself, yes, but it also created opportunities to protect others. And if taking down Los Cuervos meant saving innocent lives, then so be it. By the time night fell, news of the raid and its aftermath had begun to leak. Whispers traveled fast in Monterrey, especially when it came to stories about cartels. At first, it was just rumors. Los Cuervos had been infiltrated, their secrets exposed. Then came confirmation. Several high-ranking members of the cartel were arrested during coordinated raids led by local police and federal agents. Others disappeared entirely, their whereabouts unknown. Those who remained scrambled to distance themselves from the chaos, fearful of being implicated or targeted next. For the residents of Monterrey, the events were both shocking and thrilling. They'd lived under the shadow of Los Cuervos for years, too afraid to speak out against the violence and corruption that plagued their city. Now, hope flickered to life again. People dared to imagine a future where streets were safer, businesses thrived without extortion, and children could grow up without fear. And while many didn't know who to thank for this sudden turn of events, some suspected it had something to do with the mysterious woman living in the hilltop mansion. Back at her estate, Karoline watched the sunrise from her balcony, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The air was crisp, carrying with it the promise of a new day. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of relief, not because the danger was gone, but because she'd proven once again that she was more than just a wealthy recluse. She was a force to be reckoned with. But as much as she wanted to relax, she knew better than to let her guard down. Cartels were like weeds. If you didn't pull them out completely, they'd grow back stronger than ever. Los Cuervos might have been weakened, but they weren't defeated yet. Someone would step up to fill the void left by their fallen leaders, and when that happened, Karoline would need to be ready. She spent the rest of the morning reviewing security, footage from the mansion, looking for any signs of weakness in her defenses. Though the raid had been a success for her, it had also exposed vulnerabilities she couldn't afford to ignore. She called in a team of engineers to upgrade the surveillance system, install additional layers of protection, and reinforce the underground tunnels that ran beneath the property. If anyone tried to breach her home again, they wouldn't make it past the front gate. As the day wore on, Karoline received updates from her network of informants. Law enforcement agencies were working overtime to process the intel she'd provided, and reporters were already chasing leads on the story. It wouldn't be long before the world knew exactly what had happened that night and who was behind it. While she preferred to stay out of the spotlight, Karoline understood the value of sending a message. Let them talk, she thought. Let them wonder. Fear was a powerful weapon, and she intended to use it wisely. By evening, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She retired to her bedroom, closing the heavy wooden doors behind her. As she slipped under the covers, she replayed the events of the past few days in her mind. The raid, the capture, the aftermath. It had all unfolded exactly as she'd planned. Yet despite her victory, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, someone was plotting their revenge. And when that day came, Karoline knew she'd have to face it head-on. For now, though, she closed her eyes and let sleep take her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and new opportunities. But tonight, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The days that followed the raid brought a whirlwind of activity, both in Monterey and beyond. News outlets picked up fragments of the story, piecing together rumors and leaked details to paint a picture of what had happened. Journalists described Los Cuervos as a house of cards crumbling under pressure, while anonymous sources hinted at a shadowy figure pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Some claimed it was a rival cartel seeking revenge. Others speculated about foreign intelligence agencies dismantling organized crime networks. Few dared to suggest the truth, that a woman living alone in a hilltop mansion had orchestrated the entire downfall. Karoline Leavitt watched it all unfold with a mix of fascination and unease. She scrolled through headlines on her tablet during breakfast, sipping espresso as she absorbed the public's reaction. Theories ranged from ridiculous to surprisingly close to the mark, but none fully captured the complexity of what she'd done. That was fine by her. Let them guess. Let them wonder. Anonymity was one of her greatest assets, and she wasn't about to give it up anytime soon. Still, the attention made her uneasy. For years, she'd operated in the shadows, relying on discretion to keep herself safe. Now, whispers of the ghost began circulating, not just among criminals but within law enforcement circles too. People spoke of her with a mix of awe and fear, describing her as someone who could dismantle empires without ever showing her face. It was flattering in a way, but also dangerous. Fame, even if indirect, attracted enemies. And Karoline knew, better than anyone, that enemies were unpredictable. To stay ahead, she doubled down on security measures around her property. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter 24/7, their presence visible enough to deter trouble, but discreet enough not to draw unnecessary scrutiny. Surveillance systems were upgraded to include facial recognition software capable of identifying intruders before they even reached the gate. Even the landscaping was altered. Thorny bushes replaced decorative shrubs near the walls, and motion-activated floodlights illuminated every inch of the grounds after sunset. Inside the mansion, Karoline worked tirelessly to fortify her defenses. Further, she converted an unused wing of the house into a secondary control room, complete with backup generators and encrypted communication devices. If anything happened to her primary setup, she'd have a failsafe ready to go. She also reviewed footage from the raid repeatedly, studying every move the cartel members had made. What had they missed? Where had they slipped up? Understanding their mistakes would help her prepare for future threats. Her efforts didn't stop there. Karoline reached out to trusted allies, asking them to monitor chatter among criminal groups. Rumors spread quickly in underworld circles, and she wanted to know if anyone was planning retaliation. So far, the response had been silence, a sign that Los Cuervos' remaining members were either too scared or too disorganized to act. But Karoline wasn't naive enough to believe it would last forever. Revenge was a powerful motivator, and sooner or later someone would come knocking. Despite the chaos swirling around her, moments of quiet reflection became increasingly important. Karoline often found herself sitting on her balcony late at night, staring out at the city lights below. From this vantage point, Monterey looked peaceful, almost serene. Cars moved along distant roads, families gathered in homes, and life carried on as usual. Few people realized how fragile that peace truly was, how much effort went into maintaining it. She thought about the men locked away in the warehouse, the ones who had underestimated her so completely. Did they regret their decision now? Did they understand why she'd done what she did? Probably not. To them, she was likely just another obstacle standing between them and power. But Karoline saw things differently. Every choice she made, every risk she took was part of a larger mission, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Whether it was shielding innocent civilians from violence or ensuring justice for crimes committed in secret, her actions always served a purpose. That purpose weighed heavily on her shoulders, though. Nights like these reminded her of everything she'd sacrificed to get here. The friendships lost, the trust broken, the pieces of herself she'd left behind along the way. Some nights, she wondered if it was worth it. Was she really making a difference or simply trading one kind of darkness for another? These questions haunted her, but they also kept her grounded. Without them, she might forget why she started this journey in the first place. As dawn approached, Karoline returned indoors, determined to focus on the tasks ahead. There was still work to be done, contacts to maintain, strategies to refine, and contingencies to plan. Her network of informants provided regular updates, confirming that authorities were closing in on key figures within Los Cuervos. Arrest warrants were issued, assets frozen, and operations disrupted. The cartel's grip on Monterrey weakened, with each passing day creating space for something new to take root. For the first time in years, Karoline allowed herself to imagine what that something new might look like. Could Monterrey become a safer place? Could businesses thrive without fear of extortion? Could children walk to school without worrying about stray bullets? These dreams felt almost impossible, yet she clung to them fiercely. They gave her strength when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, hope when despair crept too close. But dreaming wasn't enough. Action was required, and Karoline knew exactly where to start. She called a meeting with her inner circle, a small group of trusted advisors who had stood by her through thick and thin. Together, they mapped out a strategy to rebuild areas devastated by cartel violence. Funds were allocated for community projects, schools, and healthcare initiatives. Local leaders were identified and supported, empowering them to take charge of their neighborhoods. Slowly but surely, change began to take shape. By the end of the week, Karoline felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, danger still lurked on the horizon. Yes, there would always be battles to fight. But for now, she chose to focus on the light breaking through the cracks. The world might never know her name or the role she played in this transformation, and that was okay. Sometimes the most impactful victories are the ones fought in silence. As the weeks rolled on, life in Monterrey began to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. Streets once dominated by fear and violence now buzzed with cautious optimism. Shopkeepers who had long paid protection money to Los Cuervos started reopening, their businesses without the weight of extortion hanging over their heads. Parents felt brave enough to let their kids play outside again, and community centers that had been abandoned for years were slowly coming back to life. While it wasn't perfect, change rarely happened overnight. The signs of progress were impossible to ignore. Karoline Leavitt watched it all from her hilltop mansion, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. She didn't take full credit for these changes. Countless individuals had worked tirelessly to rebuild what decades of cartel rule had destroyed, but she knew her role in exposing Los Cuervos had been pivotal. By dismantling one of the region's most powerful criminal organizations, she had created an opening, a chance for something better to emerge. And though she preferred to stay out of the spotlight, there was no denying the impact she'd made. Still, peace came at a cost. The fallout from the raid rippled far beyond Monterrey, reaching corners of the world Karoline hadn't anticipated. International news outlets picked up fragments of the story, spinning tales of intrigue and power struggles. Some framed her as a vigilante hero, while others painted her as a mysterious figure playing dangerous games. Speculation ran wild, with theories ranging from government conspiracies to secret societies. Yet amidst all the noise, one thing remained clear. Whoever this woman was, she commanded respect and fear. That fear became palpable when whispers of retaliation reached her ears. Despite Los Cuervos' weakened state, remnants of the cartel still lurked in the shadows, regrouping and plotting revenge. Karoline's informants reported heated discussions among low-level members, some vowing to make her pay for humiliating them. Others suggested forging alliances with rival groups to exact vengeance. None of this surprised her. Revenge was inevitable. It always was. but knowing it was coming didn't make it any less daunting. To prepare, Karoline tightened security around her estate even further. Guards rotated shifts more frequently, ensuring fresh eyes monitored every inch of the property. Surveillance drones patrolled the skies above her mansion, their cameras feeding live footage to her control room. Even the underground tunnels beneath her home were reinforced, equipped with emergency supplies and escape routes in case of another attack. Every detail mattered because in situations like this, complacency could be deadly. Yet despite her precautions, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. For all her resources and planning, she was only human. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. What if they found a way past her defenses? What if someone close to her betrayed her trust? What if the next threat came not from outside, but within her own walls? These thoughts gnawed at her during sleepless nights, leaving her restless and irritable. It wasn't just paranoia driving her concerns. A series of unsettling incidents confirmed that danger was closer than ever. First, a delivery truck showed up at her gate with falsified paperwork, its driver claiming he'd been sent by one of her suppliers. When questioned, his story fell apart and a search of the vehicle revealed hidden compartments containing weapons. Days later, an unfamiliar car lingered near her property for hours before speeding away when guards approached. Then came the anonymous letter slipped under her front door, a single sentence scrawled in jagged handwriting. "We're watching." Each event was minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern Karoline couldn't ignore. Someone was, testing her, probing for weaknesses. Whether it was Los Cuervos or another group entirely, she didn't know. What she did know was that she couldn't afford to wait for them to strike first, so she took matters into her own hands. Karoline called upon her network of allies, instructing them to dig deeper into the remnants of Los Cuervos. She wanted names, locations, connections, anything that could help her identify potential threats before they materialized. At the same time, she reached out to local law enforcement, sharing intelligence about suspicious activity in the area. Though she typically avoided direct involvement with authorities, this situation demanded cooperation. If keeping Monterrey safe meant bending her usual rules, so be it. Her efforts paid off sooner than expected. Within days, her informants uncovered evidence of a meeting between former cartel members and representatives from a rival gang. Details were scarce, but the implications were clear. An alliance was forming, and Karoline was likely their primary target. Armed with this knowledge, she devised a plan to neutralize the threat before it gained momentum. The operation unfolded swiftly and quietly. Undercover agents posing as interested buyers infiltrated the meeting, gathering valuable intel while maintaining plausible deniability. Simultaneously, Karoline coordinated with trusted contacts to leak false information designed to sow distrust among the factions. By the time the dust settled, the attempted alliance had collapsed, leaving both sides suspicious of each other's motives. Though relieved, Karoline knew this victory was temporary. Breaking up one coalition wouldn't stop others from trying. Criminal organizations thrived on adaptability, constantly evolving to survive. To truly protect herself and the city she cared about, she needed to think bigger. That realization led her to consider a bold idea: going public. For years, Karoline had operated in secrecy, relying on anonymity to shield her identity. But what if visibility offered a different kind of protection? What if stepping into the light forced her enemies to reconsider targeting her? It was a risky move, one that required careful planning and unwavering resolve. Still, the possibility intrigued her. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding and start fighting back openly. As she mulled over this decision, Karoline spent evenings walking through her mansion, reflecting on how far she'd come. From the early days of building her empire to the recent battle against Los Cuervos, every step had shaped her into the person she was today. She thought about the sacrifices she'd made, the battles she'd fought, and the people she'd helped along the way. Was she ready to face the world head-on? Could she handle the scrutiny and backlash that would inevitably follow? Only time would tell. For now she focused on fortifying her position and staying one step ahead of those who sought to harm her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she vowed to meet them with the same determination and resilience that had brought her this far. Because, in the end, survival wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about ensuring that the fragile peace she'd helped create had a fighting chance to endure. The decision to step into the light weighed heavily on Karoline Leavitt. It wasn't a choice she made lightly, nor was it one without risk. For years, her anonymity had been her shield, a way to operate freely without drawing too much attention. But now, with threats closing in from all sides and whispers of retaliation growing louder, she realized that staying hidden might no longer be enough. If she wanted to protect herself and the fragile progress taking root in Monterey, she needed to change the rules of the game. Her plan began with a carefully orchestrated media campaign. She didn't reveal everything about herself. Instead, she presented a version of the truth, one designed to inspire trust while keeping her most sensitive secret safe. Through anonymous interviews with trusted journalists, she shared snippets of her story. How she'd built her fortune through hard work and smart investments, how she'd faced countless challenges along the way, and how she refused to stand idly by while cartels terrorized innocent people. The message was clear. She was a survivor, someone who fought back when pushed too far. At first, public reaction was mixed. Some praised her as a symbol of hope, a rare example of someone using their wealth and influence for good. Others dismissed her as a self-serving opportunist, accusing her of grandstanding or seeking fame. Critics questioned her motives, pointing out the irony of a billionaire positioning herself as a champion of the common people. Yet despite the skepticism, something undeniable emerged from the chaos: curiosity. People wanted to know more about this woman who seemed to exist in the gray area between hero and enigma. Karoline embraced the attention, using it to her advantage. She gave a single televised interview, an appearance so meticulously planned that every word felt deliberate. Dressed simply but elegantly, she sat across from the interviewer with an air of calm confidence. When asked why she'd chosen to speak out now, she paused before answering, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've spent my life building walls," she said, her piercing gaze locked onto the camera. "Walls to protect myself, my family, and the things I care about. But I've come to realize that walls can only do so much. They keep danger out, yes, but they also keep hope from getting in." Her words resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom saw themselves in her struggle. She spoke not just as a wealthy entrepreneur, but as a human being who understood pain, fear, and resilience. By opening up, even slightly, she invited others to see her as more than a mysterious figure lurking behind the headlines. And though some remained skeptical, many couldn't help but admire her courage. But stepping into the spotlight came at a price. Almost immediately after the interview aired, threats intensified. Anonymous messages flooded her social media accounts, warning her to stay quiet or face consequences. Surveillance teams detected increased activity near her property, with unfamiliar vehicles lingering suspiciously along the road leading to her estate. One night, a drone buzzed over her mansion, its camera flashing intermittently before disappearing into the darkness. Each incident served as a reminder that visibility brought both power and peril. Rather than retreat, Karoline doubled down. She hired additional security personnel, installed advanced anti-drone systems around her property, and launched a private investigation to track down the source of the threats. At the same time, she continued her efforts to rebuild Monterey, pouring resources into community programs aimed at empowering residents. Her foundation funded new schools, healthcare clinics, and job training initiatives, creating opportunities for those who had long been exploited by cartels. Slowly but surely, the city began to transform, not because of her alone, but because she had sparked a movement. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, when the mansion was silent except for the hum of security equipment, Karoline found herself questioning whether she was doing the right thing. Had she traded one kind of vulnerability for another? Was exposing herself worth the risk? These thoughts haunted her, but they also reminded her why she'd started this: journey in the first place. Power protected itself, yes, but true strength came from protecting others. Months passed and the tension began to ease. Authorities cracked down on remaining cartel members, arresting key figures and dismantling operations tied to Los Cuervos. Rival gangs, wary of crossing someone as formidable as Karoline, kept their distance. Even the anonymous threats tapered off, replaced by an uneasy truce. Though the threat of violence still lingered, Monterrey felt different, safer, brighter, full of promise. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Karoline stood on her balcony overlooking the city. Below her, lights twinkled like stars scattered across the landscape. Cars moved steadily along roads once ruled by fear, and laughter echoed faintly from neighborhoods reclaiming their sense of normalcy. It wasn't perfect. There was still work to be done, but it was progress. And for the first time in years, Karoline allowed herself to feel a flicker of peace. She thought about the battles she'd fought, the sacrifices she'd made, and the scars she carried, both visible and invisible. There would always be risks, always be enemies waiting in the shadows. But she had learned something important along the way. Resilience wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about enduring it, growing stronger with each challenge, and refusing to let fear dictate your choices. As she turned to head inside, Karoline glanced back at the city one last time. Whatever tomorrow held, she knew she was ready. Not because she believed herself invincible, but because she understood the stakes. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever dreamed of a better future. And if standing in the light meant giving them a chance to see that future clearly, then so be it. After all, sometimes the bravest thing you could do was step forward, even when the path ahead was uncertain.